All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. So this is some slides I kind of threw together yesterday, rather than just me just pulling up Home Assistant and showing it to everybody, kind of to walk through kind of what my journey into home automation was like, and maybe why I made some of the decisions that I made along the process. Um, so maybe first we should talk about what home automation really is, and it boils down to using computers to actually make changes to our physical world. And when we talk about doing something like that, we're kind of talking about what is the one place that we spend probably most of our time, and in regards to our physical location, and it's for most of us, it's our home. um, so we can use computers to actually manipulate the physical environment around us to turn lights on, turn lights off, lock doors, things like that. But the important thing about home automation is not necessarily just how I can pull up my phone and unlock my door from 200 miles away, or how I can turn lights on and off. It's actually making those things automatic so that I don't have to think about them, rather than have to worry, hey, did I lock all the doors before I went to bed last night? It's like, no, I don't have to worry about that. Home Assistant will make sure that all the doors are locked at 9 p.m. Or, we just left the house. Is the garage door down? Well, don't worry about that, because if I left the garage door up, it will automatically close the garage door for me. It provides a lot of automation for things, repetitive tasks that we do a lot of times unconsciously. We just kind of do them, we without even thinking about them. And when you boil it down to it, what we're doing is we're basically acting like computers. We shouldn't be doing that. We're humans. We should be solving human problems and letting computers solve computer problems. Um, so my home automation journey started probably in 2012 when we bought this house. And we bought this house. It was the model home for the neighborhood, and it had a lot of the upgrades. And one of the cool things it had was it had these eave lights, along the edges of the house, that I always thought were really nice, especially at night. They look really pretty. And I kind of wanted to have them, turn them on, at sunset, and maybe turn them off a little bit later. The problem was they're controlled. There are two different banks of eave lights. That are controlled from two different switches on two different ends of the house. So, if I wanted to turn them on, I'd have to walk from one room, turn one bank on, walk to another room, turn the other bank on, and then do the same thing at whenever time I wanted them to turn off. And I'd have to remember to go turn them off, things like that. Um, my first kind of attempt to do this, I used these little Wemo Wi-Fi switches. They're basically just unitary switches that you install in a switch box. You connect them to your Wi-Fi, and then you can use the Wemo app on your phone to turn them on and off, to program them, to things like that. Um, they kind of worked, but they're also kind of a pain. The first thing I noticed that kind of annoyed me was that when you first install them, they immediately want to do a firmware update, and you can't do anything with that switch for like 20 minutes while the firmware is updating, which is struck me as a little bit kind of odd. You can't even turn the switch on and off while the firmware is updating. It was a real bummer. And then there's the kind of the privacy factor. A lot of the things that go into home automation, if you're somebody who thinks a little bit about privacy, you're kind of constantly having to balance that privacy versus ease of use, privacy versus you know things that are very very easy to use, versus doing something in your house that maybe is quite not as quite easy to use. And that was kind of how I felt with the Wemo switches, because any command that I had to send had to go out to the Belkin Wemo Wi-Fi cloud first, and then had to be sent back to my switch, which was really annoying to me because I'm standing here next to it on the same Wi-Fi network as it. There is no reason that this needs to happen. There's a lot of things like that in the IoT world. Uh, So you're kind of constantly having to balance that need for privacy versus the what you have available. So after kind of being unhappy with those how those Wemo switches work, the other thing about them was that sometimes they just didn't work. I mean, like they would like the bank like the command would go from the Wemo cloud to both switches, but only one would turn them off. So I'd wake up the next morning and lights half the lights had been on all night, and it was kind of annoying. And there was, and moreover, that was like the only they have like a small Wemo switch, and then they have the in wall ones, but those were your only options. They didn't have like an outdoor switch or anything like that. So after being kind of unhappy with the way the Wemo switches worked, I started kind of looking into what else was out there. And started looking at what there out there might be in regards to standards ways to do that. And there are kind of a handful of home automation standards, and Zigbee and Z-Wave are the two big ones. There's also X10, which is kind of an older protocol that uses power line communication. My dad had some X10 devices way back in the early 2000s. So that one has been around for a while. And Insteon is also a newer protocol that's power line, but also has some mesh wireless abilities as well. Zigbee and Z-Wave are mesh wireless protocols. So that means that I won't say each device, but most devices, which are called nodes, also act as rebroadcasters, so that your signal from your hub can be retransmitted along a path until it reaches the final node that it's actually intended for. Kind of makes it a little bit easier. You don't have to run wires. You don't really have to worry about what things are in range of the hub at all times, as long as there's another Zigbee or another Z-Wave device nearby that's capable of acting as a repeater. Your signals are going to make it to your end nodes. I decided on Z-Wave mostly because it uses the 900 megahertz band, which is a little bit less crowded, and it has a little bit longer range because it's a lower frequency. It penetrates a little bit further than the 2.4 gigahertz band. Zigbee is in the 2.4 gigahertz band. It's the same band that Wi-Fi uses, so it tends to be a little bit more crowded, a little bit more noisy, and not quite as long a range. And I say that, but eventually I ended up with a little of both devices, not intentionally. I kind of ended up with them on accident. I bought some Z-Wave locks from Kwikset that at first I had all Z-Wave locks, but then I had to replace two, and I ordered replacements, and they accidentally sent me Zigbee ones, and I never bothered to correct it because why not? I mean, I have a Zigbee radio, so it didn't really matter. But kind of eventually, I've ended up using both. So I kind of alluded to this a second ago. These protocols are mesh network protocols, and all protocols, they need a hub. And the hub acts as kind of the central coordinator of your messages. You know, it's the source for your automation. So if I go on my phone and I say, hey, turn on this light, the command go to turn on the light goes to the hub. And the hub then transmits it out to all the devices where it's picked up. I initially decided to use SmartThings for this, and SmartThings is, at the time, it was an independent company that sold a little white box with an Ethernet port on the back of it. And this little white box had Zigbee and Z-Wave radios in it. So once you had this box, you could start connecting these switches and other protocol-based things to it, and then making automations with them. I kind of decided to use SmartThings at first because a friend of mine down in Birmingham was already using it, and he had good things to say about it. So in 2015, I took the Wemo switches out, installed the Z-Wave switches, and everything was working great. I mean, literally it was completely reliable. I never had lights fail to turn on or off. Everything just kind of worked out really well. So having said that, I got really excited about this, and I started installing more of these switches everywhere. I installed one at the front porch, installed the garage lights, installed them in the pantry. I added Z-Wave sensors all over the house. So, you know, if the door's open, I know which doors are open or closed. including on the garage doors. I mentioned a little bit ago, I added Z-Wave locks as well. So I can, I have the keypad locks on my house, and then I added the Z-Wave cards to them so that I could lock and unlock them remotely. And it was pretty cool. Everything was working out kind of well, but then everything went wrong. First off, Samsung bought SmartThings and then kind of proceeded to just completely destroy it. It was kind of my fear when they bought them, because they were a scrappy little startup company and they were really focused on, being cool to devs. They had a groovy IDE that you could go in and write complex things. It was really cool. And their app allowed you to, their phone app was actually really good and allowed you to actually write really complex automations that you couldn't. And then Samsung released their new app, and first of all, you couldn't migrate anything from the old app to the new app. You had to migrate everything manually from the old app to the new app. And then it just, you couldn't do a lot of the really complex expressive rules that you could do in the old app, you couldn't do in the Samsung app. A great example of this is I had a rule that, given my garage, which has 2 garage doors and an entry door, it's a detached garage, turn the lights off 5 minutes after the last door closes. And literally, I spent 2 days to conclude that it was literally impossible to express that rule in the new app. You could do it in the old app very easily. Basically, it was just you checked the box that said one interaction at a time, one execution at a time. So if there was if it was triggered again by another door closing, it would just cancel the old one and reset the timer. Literally no way to do that in the new app. And the other thing that happened, though, probably the bigger thing, though, was that I started adding a lot more things that were kind of outside SmartThings ecosystem. So I added smart sprinkler controllers, the Rachio sprinkler system controllers. I had Ecobee thermostats, the garage door openers. I could open my garage door from my phone. The mini split controller, because this was the model house, the room my office is in was the garage, and they used it as a sales office. And I was like, cool, that's awesome, keep it there. That'll be a perfect place for my home office. And it has like a little LG mini split air conditioner in here, because once again, because it was a garage, it's not connected to the house's HVAC system. So I had a little Sensibo mini split controller that I could turn the mini split on and off from my phone. But all of these things had their own apps that were independent of SmartThings, and it was really starting to become kind of a bear to juggle all this stuff. And I really wanted a way that I could kind of write rules that could control everything, that I could, turn my, if everybody's left the house, set the thermostats to away, be sure all the doors are locked, do all this in one place that didn't kind of have that didn't kind of have this fragmentation that was kind of developing in my house. So I started looking around, seeing what was out there. And the other thing was, once again, alluding to the kind of the balancing of privacy versus ease of use. I kind of wanted to find something that did as much local processing as possible, and something that was preferably open source. So I kind of landed on Home Assistant, which is also called Haas.io. And it's an open source home automation system that's written in Python, mostly written in Python. Obviously the front end is all JavaScript and stuff like that, but all the back end stuff is done in Python. And with the right hardware, it can, directly control the Zigbee and Z-Wave devices, as well as any of these other devices using APIs. It supports literally everything you can possibly imagine. It has a web interface, it has mobile apps, it has all the stuff you would come to expect from it, and it's all open source. The cool thing to think about Home Assistant is kind of like a framework in which to build your home automation system. So out of the box, it actually doesn't do a whole lot. You have to start adding what they call them integrations, but essentially they're plugins to it to do certain things. So you add, you'll add the Z-Wave Pro plugin, you'll add the Zigbee plugin, you'll add the Ecobee plugin. And all of this stuff kind of gets integrated into a single large kind of unified system that you can do. things with. It can be installed on a Raspberry Pi using pre-built images. That one, the picture right there, is actually my Home Assistant installation, and it's running on a Raspberry Pi, sitting behind the entertainment center. And I added the Go controlled Zigbee and Z-Wave hubs so that I could control the Zigbee and Z-Wave devices. This is what I was talking about with the integrations. They're kind of like plugins. They add functionality to Home Assistant to do things. Out of the box, Home Assistant actually discovered some of the stuff that was in my house already, like Plex and Sonos. It both automatically discovered those, and then just all I had to do was like click configure, and it was like, okay, we're done. These things are set up now. I'm like, okay, that's really cool. And others I had to add manually. Some of them I had to kind of go. You had to go a level deeper. Some of them aren't quite point and click, like the MyQ garage door opener things that I have were not point and click. You had to drop down to YAML to configure them. Functionality is there, it's just not exposed. And you'll see that in a lot of places in Home Assistant. A lot of the things that you kind of wanted that you would do as routine things are very easy to do, but there's also that level underneath it that's very powerful that you can jump down to if you need to. If you want to write a really complex rule, if you want to write or integrate with some weird service that may not be directly supported, you can always do these things. The functionality is there. It just requires a little bit lower level work. Things that, we as engineers are totally fine doing if we need that ability. So the process of converting to Home Assistant took me actually about a week. And I started by migrating all the cloud stuff first, mostly because I could do that. There was no downside to doing that. I could do that without messing with anything that SmartThings was already doing. So, I started with the Ecobee, the Rachio, the Sensibo, MyQ, that kind of stuff. I migrated all that stuff first. And, I started poking around with it, experimenting with it, going, okay, this is cool. This is pretty cool. So then I decided to kind of start to migrate, actually go deeper into the world and start kind of migrating the Zigbee and the Z-Wave devices. And this process was really complicated. It took me about 5 hours to migrate all of my Zigbee and Z-Wave devices. It worked out to, like I said, they're one about every 11 minutes, mostly because you have to unpair it from SmartThings first and then repair it to Home Assistant. You could theoretically just unpair everything and repair everything, but the problem is that when they come up at Home Assistant, they come up with just some generic name like Jasco Switch with a model number that doesn't really mean anything until you give it a name, until you tell it what it is. And if you were to just do that, do them all at once, you would basically then just have to go through and figure out which one was which and rename it. So by doing them one at a time, you kind of you have the ability to set them up as you're going. And the other thing that you had to do is I had to kind of be creative with my migration, because once again, remembering that this is a mesh network protocol, you had to be sure that nodes that were at the far end of the mesh could still communicate with one or both of the hubs in the process of doing this. So my garage is a great example of this. I have some sensors on the garage doors that are probably about my most remote Z-Wave sensors. So I first had to migrate a switch in the garage first that could act as a repeater for Home Assistant. Then I could migrate the two nodes at the far end and then go back and migrate the other switch, so that way there was always a path of communication to both hubs as I was doing this process. That might be an edge case for me, because it's a pretty big house, and nodes at the far end might have a hard time. If you have a smaller house, you might not have to go to quite that level of work that I did, but it's just something to be aware of, because once again, you're dealing with a mesh network and you're disrupting the mesh. So you've got to kind of be careful about which devices you move and when. After that, I started migrating all my automations, and that actually ended up being really easy to do, because before before I had decided I was going to switch to Home Assistant, I had migrated all my automations and SmartThings to WebCore, which was kind of a third party rules engine for SmartThings. So you can kind of program them the way a programmer would. So at that point, I had already done I mean, I had already gone through all of my automations that I had written in SmartThings, and I knew how they worked. So it was actually really easy to migrate them to Home Assistant. Um, they can be done broadly in two ways, and the GUI is like not fine for like 99% of the work you do. Like literally, I only had to drop down to YAML for one automation. And that was the weirdest one. It's like I wanted an automation to run on weekdays, and there was no way to represent weekdays in the GUI, which was kind of weird to me. But that was the only one I had to jump down to YAML to directly configure. The rest of them I was able to configure straight in the GUI. Here's some examples. These are some examples of automations that I have in my house. I already talked about the first one there. Turn the overhead lights on and then in the garage when any of the three doors open, and then turn them off 5 minutes after the last door closes. This is mostly because I have a bad habit of forgetting something, usually my phone in my truck. And then I'm like, where's my phone? Oh yeah, I left it in my truck. Go back out there. So leave the lights on for 5 minutes because I'm probably going to come back out there. Turn the front door porch light on when the front door opens, turn it off when it closes. Even landscape lighting, turn on 30 minutes before sunset, turn the eaves off at 9, turn the landscape lights off at 11. And this one's one of my favorite ones. This is one I wrote a couple months ago. If it's going to be a nice day, and I define that as a high temperature of the day between 68 and 80, turn the air conditioners off at 7 a.m. and send me a push notification to open the windows. At 7 p.m., send me another notification reminding me to close the windows, and then turn everything back on at 7:15. I would love to have windows that automatically open and close themselves, but that's a lot of money, and I'm not going to go to that level of expense for what is kind of essentially a hobby. And I have probably 20 or 30 automations that I've written just to do random things around the house. Turn the pantry light, or turn the pantry light open when the door opens, so it never have to like turn the pantry light on, things like that. Another thing it does is presence detection, and it can be done using the mobile app. So both my wife and I have the Home Assistant mobile app installed on our phones, and you can draw a nice little geofence around the property, and then Home Assistant periodically will check to see if your phone is actually within the geofence. If not, it marks you both as gone, and you can take actions based on whether anybody else is gone. Like I have an action to turn the security system on, lock all the doors if both of us leave. The way it kind of does presence detection is a little weird. It basically checks to see if the devices are on the network. Now they have a third-party service, a cloud service that you can subscribe to that will actually do like the geolocation stuff and will actually trigger your device remotely, or will actually send that update remotely to Home Assistant. You don't have to have that. The way I got around that was by installing OpenVPN on my router and then putting VPN clients on my phone, so that basically we're always on the remote network, so it can always send device updates from where we are. So having talked about all that, I can now give you a little quick demonstration and a quick tour kind of around my Home Assistant installation. So I'm going to stop this share now, and I will pick up on itself. All right, so this is this is my main dashboard on Home Assistant, and you can have multiple dashboards. I've only created one so far. Some people go into like really, really deep levels of creativity with this stuff. You can pull in custom CSS, you can write custom cards. A lot of people have built, and this is something I'm going to do eventually if I ever have time to, have built like dashboards that basically can function as control panels, and then they will install that on like a tablet or something mounted somewhere in their house, so that you can just go push buttons to take certain actions in your house. So you have a single command center that you can take your actions from. I haven't gone to that level yet. I kind of like to, but I've got so many other spinning plates going on right now that I don't know that I'm going to get a chance to do that. Maybe I will someday. So you can kind of see, I've got my three, my three thermostats. This one always measures high. I don't know why. It's definitely not 78 in here right now. In the rest of the house, they seem to be reasonably accurate. And I've got some of my lights pulled out here that I like to be able to quickly control. I can raise and lower my garage doors. I see all my doors are closed right here. This is something I've been fooling around with right now. I found a plugin that lets you create combination cards. So I'm kind of trying to combine the doors and locks and batteries and all in one location so that I can kind of look at that real quick. So, here's my office lamps in here. I just turned the lights off in my office. Just turn them back on. And they're like that all throughout my house. They can be turned on and off kind of at will. You have a logbook so you can see what actions took place. So you see, like here you can see like, or I just turn the lights on and off, and it will show doors opening and closing, when people come, when people go. It keeps a log of all this stuff. And the cool thing is all this is kept locally. This is not stored in some cloud anywhere. That was something that always made me really uncomfortable. It was something that always made me really uncomfortable about using smart things, was that Samsung knew everything that happened in my house. They knew when I went away. They knew when I was back. They knew when my garage doors opened. That they could, and anybody who either compromised my account or compromised Samsung would have complete control over my house. Would have complete knowledge of when I was there, when I was not. They could show up and clean the place out. It was always something that made me really uncomfortable with using smart things, and something that I could never understand why they designed it that way, other than for the explicit purpose of data mining. So all this stuff that you're seeing here is stored locally on that Raspberry Pi. I can go and wipe it out right now if I wanted to, and it would never leave the house. The only exception is for the devices, the third-party integrations that actually do require cloud support. So the Ecobee controllers, they still need the cloud support. The garage door opener thing, for reasons that I don't really understand, needs cloud support. The Rachio, the sprinkler controller, all that stuff that actually works on the cloud. But it only knows that smart thing, or that only knows that Home Assistant said turn this on. It doesn't know any of the other stuff that's happening in the house. So at least the privacy implications there are a little bit less than, or a little bit maybe less than you might experience somewhere else. Actually, this is actually something else right here. See, this is something that you'll get when you first install it. It'll say like new devices discovered, or sometimes if you'll install an update, it'll be like new devices discovered. So go check it out, and it will take you over to the integrations page and see. It found my printers. Why I'm not sure what you would do with printers and a smart home system. Maybe have it print something if I come home. I don't know, but it supports that. And here you can see a bunch of the things that I've added to smart things. The Logitech Harmony remote that I have in the living room, so I can say, I've got Alexa integration working too. So now I can walk in the living room and say, Alexa, turn on the TV. And I don't even have to find the remote control anymore. It just does it, which is actually really nice, because I like we use our Apple TV as like the single focus of our TV. So I don't even have to, I can just interact with the Apple TV remote. I don't have to use the Harmony remote. There's the weather service integration, so you can take action based on the weather. You can take action based on Plex. One of the things I'd like to do once I get the switches in place is when a movie starts playing, dim the lights in the room. That seems like that'd be something really cool to do. So those are the integrations. And Smart Things is kind of built around what they call entities. So everything in Smart Things is an entity. It's an entity like a device tracker. or a switch, and you give it unique names, and then you are able to manipulate those entities. The you are able to manipulate the properties on those entities to take actions in your house. You can also, like, there's an entity for eaves, and you can group them up and take actions based on a whole group instead of just on individual devices. So I grouped up all my Eve lights, which is the two, getting back to the beginning of the presentation where I want to be able to turn my Eve lights on and off. There are two banks plus the ones in the garage that control the outside lanterns on the garage. I've grouped them all up into one group, called them Eves, and I can now turn them on and off all at the same time without having to turn on each individual one on and off, or create a automation that controls them all. They're all just in one big group. Like, it even has my FreeBSD router, which is pfSense in there. I mean, I probably have like 200 entities in here. A lot of times a device will come up, it would be one device, but it'll have like 5 entities. So, a sensor will come up and it will have a sensor, and it will also have a battery as a separate entity that you can view and take action on based on the values of the entities. But I kind of alluded to it in the beginning that the big part of doing home automation is the automations part. You want to be able to take these actions automatically without you having to think about them. So, like I said, these are some of the automations that I've written. Let's see. Here's my work from home automation. So this one triggers at 8 a.m. on weekdays. And what it does is, first it checks to be sure that that we're actually home by checking the alarm system. So it says, hey, are you home or not? If you're not home, we're not going to do any of this, because by definition, if I'm on vacation or something, I'm probably not going to be working from home. And then it unlocks the office door and turns on the air conditioners in the front room. If it's not going to be a nice day, turns on the HVAC. Checks the max temperature to set the mode correctly, or turns on the heater in my office. And you can kind of see here, what you're doing is you're kind of nesting conditions here. So you have choose, and then state, and sensor is nice day. That's a custom sensor that I wrote that checks the weather service to see if it's going to be a nice day or not. And then it turns the climate on, does all the things that you would expect it to do, and then turns the office lamps, the ones that I just turned on and off, it turns them on. So that I walk into my office in the morning, either the air conditioner or the heater is on, or neither is on, depending on whether or not it's a nice day. The light's on, everything's ready for me to start working without me having to take any of these actions. It's kind of simple, kind of hacky, but it's fun. And some of these are actually pretty useful. This one I wrote, some of you might have seen the picture of the pond we built in our backyard earlier this year. Well, later on this fall, I started to figure, it's getting close to winter and it's going to start getting cold, and that thing's probably going to freeze. So I need to probably be able to turn that pump off so that it doesn't get damaged if the pond freezes, and then turn on the heater to keep the water warm. So I wrote an automation for that, so I don't have to think about it. I have basically an outdoor Z-Wave switch that sits outside next to the pond that can turn the pump on and off. It can turn the heater on and off. The school mornings one, this was a bigger deal when Scarlett was in school, was actually physically in school. It would, turn the lights on at 6:30 so that you weren't coming downstairs to a dark house. Just a lot of these little things that you can do. The garage lights off. This was the one I was talking about, where turn them off 5 minutes after the last one closes. So, it waits 5 minutes and then turns it off. You can also, this is something that I haven't dug too deeply into now, but they also have the ability now to actually write your integrations actually in Python itself. So if you don't want to use the GUI builder, if you don't want to use YAML, you can actually write very complex, very expressive actions actually in Python by calling Home Assistant at a base level. That's really useful for hackers like us who like to dig into things like that. You can have multiple users. Obviously, both my wife and I are users. They're attached to our phones. It's really the best way to think about Home Assistant, kind of like I said, is it's a framework in which to build a home automation system for yourself. If you're just looking for something that you can just turn lights on and off, you want to unlock your doors remotely, maybe some few simple actions, you know, smart things might work for you. Other tools out there, there are several other different hubs out there that might work well for you if you want to do just simple things. But if you're a hacker and you want to do really cool, really custom stuff around your house, Home Assistant is like, I think, really probably the biggest name in the game.
Have you encountered any problems with Home Assistant being laggy and getting new products into their integrations database?
No, actually, I haven't found that at all. I found that actually they tend to be ahead of the game, mostly because there aren't actually that many products out there right now. I mean, in the home automation space that are new. Most of the stuff that anything that's Zigbee or Z-Wave is supported out of the box just because those are open protocols, and any new things that you add that are maybe like cloud integrations or stuff like that is probably already either, if it's not already supported, it will be very shortly, because they already have all in place all of the work to do that. And even then, if they have an open API and documentation and you want to write a custom one, it is really easy to just, because they have like they have like basically they have a REST client built in so that you can, if you do encounter something that isn't directly supported, you can literally just write it as a REST client application that calls whatever the thing is API to take actions.
Okay.
All right, so I'll jump back to the presentation now. I can find it. There we go. So the cool thing, once you start going down this rabbit hole, you realize that it's a really deep rabbit hole. You can start doing custom things like MQTT bridges. So this is something I've been looking at for a while now, that you have like this alarm system control panels that come from third-party companies like ADT or something like that. A lot of times they'll have something on the board that you can tap into to intercept commands. And then you can attach that to a little, like an ESP32 or something like that, that broadcast and can then make a post out to a message broker, an MQTT message broker, and then Home Assistant can pick that up and take actions on it. To the right there, this is something that I've been kind of hacking on a little bit recently, is an ESP32 controller for the heater in my office. This little DeLonghi oil radiator in my office, that it's not smart in like the Ecobee or Sensibo kind of way, but it does have a remote control. So I'm sitting there thinking, I bet you I could send remote control commands to it. And it turns out that there's a project out there kind of running in parallel to Home Assistant called ESP Home, that uses these little ESP32 Wi-Fi programmable controllers here. You can get these things for like 2 for $10 on Amazon. They have Wi-Fi built in, and then they're just programmable to make them do whatever you want. And so you flash ESP Home on it, and then you can configure it using YAML. So this is a little controller that I built that controls the heater in here by sending the same IR commands that the remote control for it would send. I attached a little, you can kind of see it right there. I attached a little reader there and point the remote at it so I could read the commands, and then I can rebroadcast those commands. So it shows up in Home Assistant now as a switch, and I can say, hey, go turn this on. And it does it just by sending out the right IR command. That kind of runs in parallel to Home Assistant. It's a separate project, but it's run in parallel, and there's a lot of people doing low-level control with these ESP32 devices. They're kind of doing a lot of interesting things with them. These are some of the upcoming things that I'm working on right now. One of the things that I'd like to do is like car presence detection and parking sensors. My wife has a tendency to pull a little bit too far into our garage to where I can't get around my workbench. So I was thinking about putting in some like ultrasonic positioning sensors that can tell where the car is in the garage. And to be fair, I do this with my truck too, because my new truck just barely fits in the garage. There's about a foot of space on either side. So I need to be aware that I don't accidentally hit something with my truck too, pulling it in the garage. So, I can, my idea is to kind of have these ultrasonic positioning sensors and then a big stoplight up at the top that lets you, some green to yellow to red when you're getting too close to something. The other thing, this is something that I've been running into recently, is I want to build like a little message box, like a physical message box to remind me to put the trash out on Thursdays and recycling out on the third Thursday of the month when it's due, so that we don't forget. Because man, we forgot a couple weeks ago and we were gone for a week, and man, our trash was just like overflowing. So I'd like to kind of build a little box there with the lights on it that lights up on the day before to remind me, with a button that I have to push to turn the light off, just to be sure that I remember to put that out there. I also like to build a mailbox sensor because I kind of like to know when the mail comes. And the cool thing about all this stuff, once again, is that it's, especially if you go, you can get started with Home Assistant. It's free. It's open source software, and you could theoretically install it on a computer. There's nothing stopping you from installing it on a computer. They even have Docker images. So you can totally get started with it right now. If you want to go the Raspberry Pi route, which is what most people do, you can get started for less than $60 with just a Raspberry Pi, the power supply, the case, and like an SD card. If you're going to do the Zigbee Z-Wave, if you're going to go down the Zigbee Z-Wave path, kind of like I did, you're going to need a Zigbee and Z-Wave radios. And I've linked the product there that actually has, it's a USB fob that has Zigbee and Z-Wave radios on it, and Home Assistant just supports it out of the box. You just have to go in and configure it. And that's kind of it. That's the kind of the resources there for a lot of the stuff I did. And I included the three blog posts that I've written as well about kind of my journey into Home Assistant, and then just hacking on random things around the house. So that's about it. Anybody got any questions?
You're talking about a garage sensor. I'll send you some links. I've been doing a lot of research on those here lately.
Oh, really? Cool.
And I found I basically I'm pirating together 3 different designs, because they use the ultrasonic, but they have one that you basically position your car where you want it, and you just have to press a button, and then that sets the stop distance. You don't have to do any programming. And the other thing, instead of using a stoplight, they use an LED strip. And it starts off green, and the lights just shrink down and then go yellow, and then they hit red whenever it's time to stop. But
okay, that's a cool idea.
the thing is, they progress so you can see how fast you're moving and how quickly you need to come up to a stopping point. So it's basically 3 different designs piecing together, but I'll send you links to those. And
absolutely, that's actually a really good idea. I hadn't thought about that. I was thinking the stoplight because it would look cool.
Well, yeah, there is that.
Cool too.
But and you can still do something for the final red color. But this was something that gave you progress indicator, right? It wasn't just a stop. It was like a slow down, slow down, slow down. Okay, kind of thing. But yeah, I'll send you that.
Yeah, because I have about in my garage, because my new truck is like 2 feet longer than my old truck was, like 2 or 3 feet longer. So it's like I have about 6 inches of clearance at the back and about a foot of clearance at the front. So if I pull in too far, I'm going to hit the lawnmower, or if I leave it too far, the garage door won't close.
Yep.
Anybody have any other questions?
Cool stuff, Rob.
Is anybody else doing smart home stuff? No.
I just use the HomeKit stuff. I don't really do anything at this advanced or anything like that.
Okay.
I wasn't aware that there was really a good alternative to one of the cloud-based solutions, because that's my only thing is like I just don't want to have some sort of cloud thing that knows where I am all the time. So knowing that I can do this offline, I'll actually probably start working on this.
Yeah, and Jeremy, you mentioned HomeKit. SmartThings actually has HomeKit functionality built into it. It can act as a HomeKit bridge. And that's actually how I'm controlling my Ecobee thermostats, because I found that the native Ecobee thing in Home Assistant wasn't super reliable. but it's a little bit more reliable if you're going through. That's actually probably the only problem I think I've had with Home Assistant so far, was that the Ecobee plugin wasn't super reliable, but it's been rock solid working it through HomeKit.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I like about HomeKit, but there's some things to be desired. Like you were showing that log thing. I kind of wish I had something like that in HomeKit. Show me like what happened. Like, because sometimes my automations go a little crazy. Like, and it's a lot of times it's my fault. Like I changed something and I shouldn't have touched that or something like that. And it's like, it takes me a while to figure out what the heck is going on. It'd be really nice to have like a log just to see why it turned something on or turned something off. Or
Yeah, the logging thing is really nice. We've used that. My daughter has gotten in trouble because of the logging thing on more than one occasion. Like, we've caught her going in and out of the pantry early in the morning to get snacks or something. She has run afoul of that on several occasions.
Well, cool, man.
Anybody have any other questions?
No, thanks, Rob, for putting that together. It was really good.
Cool. Glad everybody
Very cool.
enjoyed it.